give you a statement here. I want to be very precise. I don't typically read from notes, but I want to be very precise about what we've heard and what we're facing here. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts on paper here. Let me say this with regard to the top line on all of this. The U.S. military operation in Venezuela was a decisive and justified action. Nicolas Maduro is responsible for the deaths of untold thousands of Americans after years of trafficking illegal drugs and violent cartel members into our country. This is undisputed and everybody agrees with it. These are crimes for which he's been indicted in U.S. courts, and an arrest warrant was duly issued. And now he has learned what accountability looks like. Under President Trump, the United States will no longer allow criminal regimes to profit from wreaking havoc and destruction on our country. He's putting Americans first and succeeding where others have failed, and this is very clear. This operation demonstrated the unmatched precision and effectiveness, professionalism, and capability of the U.S. military. There's no other force on planet Earth that can do what we can do. And it produced an outcome only America's armed forces could achieve. Our brave military personnel who executed this successful operation with speed and precision and power deserve our gratitude and our congratulations. You should sleep a little better at night knowing that we have this great force. The Maduro regime functioned as a criminal organization masquerading as a government. This was not a legitimate president of a country. It systematically used the instruments of the Venezuela state, which is its military, its intelligence services, and its territory, to facilitate trafficking drugs into the United States. These activities were conducted in coordination with designated narco-terrorists and transnational criminal organizations that are very dangerous, directly threatening the U.S.'s sovereignty and public health and national security. The Biden administration, the previous team, offered a $25 million bounty for information leading to Maduro's arrest, following a successful 2020 indictment. Maduro had multiple opportunities to change course and cooperate with international law enforcement, and he chose not to do that. And now he's going to face the full force of American justice on U.S. soil. Congress continues to exercise oversight of U.S. military operations and closely track the situation. Tonight's briefing to the Gang of Eight was a part of that. This briefing was the 20th bipartisan briefing on military operations involving Venezuela so far. The administration has scheduled an all-member briefing on Wednesday, and I don't know if it's confirmed while we were in there, but it will be midweek. With regard to the war powers and the compliance with federal law, we are not at war. We do not have U.S. armed forces in Venezuela, and we are not occupying that country. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, that is true, but it also vests the President of the United States with vast authorities as Commander-in-Chief. Under Article 2 of the Constitution, the President has the authority, as all presidents do, to deploy military forces to address threats to the U.S. and to enforce U.S. law. That is what happened here. The War Powers Act states that notification should be made to Congress within 48 hours following the initiation of hostilities. As we've noted, and I've made many public comments, that happened almost instantaneously here. My first call was at 4 a.m. by Secretary of State Rubio. Despite the claims by some of my colleagues, under the War Powers Act, there is no requirement for prior congressional approval or prior notification. And in fact, in this case, the intelligence was so sensitive, the conditions had to be perfect, there was no predetermination of when exactly it would occur. And if there had been prior notice, even assembling the Gang of Eight, for example, during a December holiday, it would have set off alerts and very likely might have been a leaked situation which could have caused great damage to our forces, our troops there. Any claims to the contrary about the War Powers Act either misunderstand the statute and longstanding precedent, or they're just being disingenuous. Congress retains full oversight authority, and the administration is acting consistent with the law, and that's what we discussed in the room tonight. I'll close with this. With regard to international law, there's been a lot of question about that. It is important to point out the United States has never accepted any interpretation that the UN Charter limits the use of force solely to responses to armed attacks. The U.S. has always maintained the right to use force to defend our national interest, to preserve the safety of the American people, and to prevent ongoing threats to its security. Venezuela's state-sponsored drug trafficking constituted a persistent violation of U.S. sovereignty and a direct threat to the safety of our citizens, and the President was justified in taking action to stop it. I'll take just a couple questions. Manu.
You said the United States is not occupying Venezuela, so how is the United States going to run Venezuela, like the President said repeatedly, saying that the United States is in charge of Venezuela, and how much is this going to cost the United States taxpayers in terms of dollars and troops?
Look, some of these things were discussed in the SCIF. I want to say that the way that this is being described, I think, is accurate. This is not a regime change. This is a demand for change of behavior by a regime. The interim government is stood up now, and we are hopeful that they will be able to correct their action. They cannot participate with narco-terrorists and very dangerous international criminal organizations that harm and target Americans, frankly, and traffic all of these dangerous drugs into our country, that do all this great harm to our country. They cannot continue that activity. We have a way of persuasion, because their oil exports, as you know, have been ceased, and I think that will bring the country to a new governance in very short order. So we don't expect troops on the ground. We don't expect direct involvement in any other way beyond just coercing the interim government to get that going. Look, I expect that there will be an election called in Venezuela. I mean, some of these things are still being determined, of course, but it should happen in short order, and I think it will need to be so that their economy can remain stabilized and the country can remain stabilized. Look, this is still developing right now, obviously. This has all just happened within the last couple of days, and so there are more questions ultimately about how it resolves probably than answers at the moment, but that's to be expected. We took out a serious threat. We removed a serious threat in terms of an arrest, an indictment, then an arrest, and now bringing to justice, again, in America, on our soil, of someone who is doing great harm to our country. And we need the country of Venezuela now. The people cheering in the streets, elated by this outcome, as you've seen, they now can have that freedom in Venezuela again. They have vast natural resources, as you know, and if they act accordingly and as a good partner in our hemisphere, they will have a very bright future, and we're all very hopeful for that. I know the people of Florida in particular who feel this so acutely have been having parties in the streets because they know what this means. And there were Floridians in the briefing here, most notably the Secretary of State, who understands these issues and those dynamics as well as anyone. Look, I can tell you, as Speaker of the House, as the person who's in charge of defending Article I powers, I'm just going to insist to you that those have not been traversed in any way by what happened here. The President used his authority under the law. He did so in a way that caused no casualties on the American side, and got the job done with exquisite intelligence and extreme precision that can only be done by the U.S. That's why we are the world's great and last superpower, and we stand for justice, and you're going to see that meted out here. It's overdue, and everyone will be safer because this has happened. So stay tuned for the further developments.
Is there an OLC opinion